Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the US dollar, the world's reserve currency, the foundation of our financial system, the very symbol of American power, has suddenly become worthless. Every asset denominated in dollars collapses to zero. Treasury bonds, bank deposits, corporate debt, savings accounts, pensions, even the cash in your wallet, all instantly meaningless. What would follow is not just a domestic crisis, but a systemic US dollar collapse of the global financial order, and America would be at its epicenter. This scenario, however far-fetched it may seem, is a critical thought experiment that helps us assess the fragility of the current financial system and prepare for unforeseen disruptions. We will analyze 3 potential paths if the dollar loses value, from complete chaos to a managed transition, and finally, a technological leap. Each scenario presents its own challenges and opportunities, reshaping not only the American economy, but also the global geopolitical landscape. Scenario 1: Total chaos. The world grinds to a halt. In the most chaotic scenario, the US dollar collapse would trigger immediate paralysis. International trade, which relies on the dollar for over 80% of its transactions, would seize up overnight. Cargo ships would sit idle because letters of credit in dollars could no longer be honored. Airlines would ground fleets because fuel contracts priced in dollars would be void. Banks across the globe would face sudden insolvency, sparking bank runs at home as Americans rush to salvage what they can from checking accounts and retirement funds. In this world, barter and hard assets, gold, silver, oil, wheat, would quickly replace currency. American households, stripped of purchasing power, would scramble for necessities, and social unrest could flare across cities. For nations heavily reliant on remittances from U.S. workers, the sudden disappearance of dollar flows would mean instant humanitarian disaster. If this chaos persisted, the world would fragment into competing monetary blocs, with regions coalescing around their own standards. Perhaps Europe around the euro, China around the yuan, and others around commodities. 2 decades down the line, global commerce would be more costly, more inefficient, and slower growing than anything Americans have experienced in the post-war era. This is a terrifying prospect that demands incredibly detailed contingency plans from policymakers. Scenario 2: Managed transition, a controlled shock. A less catastrophic but still severe path would involve a managed transition. Here, the dollar losing value would still shatter trust, but governments would coordinate through the IMF and G20 to create a bridge. There could be a global debt holiday, suspending obligations for 60 to 90 days while central banks pump liquidity into domestic systems. Trade might shift to a basket currency, a new version of the IMF's special drawing rights, or even an interim digital settlement token backed by multiple major currencies. Oil and wheat contracts could be repriced against that basket instead of the dollar. Domestically, the Federal Reserve would attempt to stabilize basic payment systems while households endure wild inflation in the short run. Over 5 years, debt would be restructured with partial write-downs. Corporations would renegotiate contracts in alternative currencies, and trade flows would resume under a multipolar framework. For Americans, this would mean diminished global purchasing power, higher import costs, and painful adjustments in financial markets. But the basic scaffolding of commerce would survive. 2 decades later, the world could stabilize into a multi-standard environment. The dollar would no longer dominate, but it might still exist as one of several regional anchors. This scenario underscores the importance of international cooperation and the flexibility of financial institutions in addressing a global financial crisis. Scenario 3. Technological leap. Digital money takes over. In the short term, the adjustment would be messy and highly volatile, but over time, the system could deliver greater transparency, lower cross-border fees, and more open access to global trade for small businesses. 20 years on, America might find itself competing not through the supremacy of its fiat currency, but through leadership in fintech infrastructure, regulatory clarity, and commodity reserves. This is an exciting path where the future of the dollar could be tied to technological innovation and adaptability. Profound implications for the United States. Whichever path unfolds, the implications for the United States are profound. The US dollar collapse would not just erode savings and destabilize Wall Street, it would strike at the heart of America's geopolitical leverage. The ability to sanction adversaries, to borrow cheaply, and to project power abroad all rests on the global demand for dollars. Without it, the U.S. would have to earn its influence in new ways, through innovation, strategic control of resources, and alliances that transcend currency. For American citizens, the challenge would be more immediate, protecting wealth in a world where traditional savings vehicles are unreliable, diversification into hard assets, real estate, and perhaps carefully chosen digital instruments would no longer be a hedge but a necessity. It is easy to dismiss this thought experiment as too extreme, yet it underscores a critical reality. The global financial order is far more fragile than it appears. We've built decades of prosperity on the assumption that the dollar is permanent and unquestioned. But history shows that reserve currencies rise and fall. If the unthinkable happened to the dollar, the difference between chaos, managed transition, and technological reinvention would hinge on how quickly policymakers, markets, and households adapt. For the United States, survival would mean more than printing money. It would demand reinventing leadership in a financial world no longer centered on the greenback. The US dollar collapse is not just a hypothetical scenario, but a reminder of the need to understand and prepare for major shifts in the financial world. What do you think about these scenarios? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analyses on global economics and finance.